Hey, welcome to Let's Unravel, and I'm your friend Christina. So, random question. Is the pumpkin spice latte overhyped, underhyped, or is it worth the hype? I'm dying to know your thoughts. Drop a comment down below, because if you're anything like me, I have been anxiously waiting for fall, basically since the start of summer. Usually around mid-August, I'm already ramped up and ready to go for fall. And as soon as September 1st comes, it's fall in my mind. I don't need some random date in September to tell me it's officially fall. No, September 1st, I'm ready for fall. So tell me what your thoughts are on the pumpkin spice latte, and I'll let you know my thoughts at the end of this episode. Thanks for stopping by. Whether you're a new listener or friend of the show, I just wanted to say welcome. So guys, we have some new exciting things coming your way this fall. An example of this is we're going to start having guest appearances starting in September, and you are not going to want to miss a thing. So the best way to stay in the loop is if you give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Unravel Pod. And you're also going to want to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube so you don't miss any new episodes that come out. You'll get little notifications, so you're going to want to hit the bell to stay up to date on all the new things. So without any further ado, let's jump into our favorite topic here at Let's Unravel, win of the week. The win this week is something that is very special, not only for the podcast, but for myself included. This win is going to double as our topic of the week. So we are going to be talking about, and we're going to be unraveling 10 weeks of podcasting. So the reason why this being our 10th episode is so important is because you need to know this stat. The 10th episode for new podcast shows is so important because 80% of new podcasts do not make it past the first 10 episodes. And so that would put us, I believe, in the 20% of podcast shows. Just the fact that we made it to 10 episodes is truly incredible. Now, to give you some more context, the top 1% of podcasters who manage to release 21 episodes are considered to be in the top 1% of all podcasts worldwide. This means that a new podcast reaching its 10th episode has already overcome major hurdles that cause most podcasters to quit. Now, I found this on Google, and AI did help me with all of these facts. So in my opinion, I do find it to be a little bit more credible. So the win this week, it's our 10th episode. We have made it over this hurdle. What's so interesting is I have found more stats where a majority of new podcast shows won't make it past 3 episodes because you start to realize how time-consuming the process is and just everything that goes into it. And another fact is a lot of shows won't even make it to the 7th or 8th episode. So to get to the 10th episode, like the fact said, it's overcoming major hurdles that cause most podcasters to quit. So this is a huge milestone. And I believe whenever you have major milestones in your life, you should always get something to symbolize the win. And this is why we do Win of the Week at Let's Unravel. So for our win this week, for it being our 10th episode, I got this cupcake to symbolize a victory, because you need to celebrate all the wins that you have, big, small, it doesn't matter the size. They're the things that propel us forward. So let's unravel 10 weeks of podcasting. I started this whole journey on a tight timeline, and I had a lot of good intentions. I've had to learn a lot on the fly, and at times it's been really intimidating to step out into a whole new space I knew nothing about. Though the most special part about these first 9 episodes are it's been like I pulled pages straight out of my journal/diary. You've heard some of my crazy stories and life lessons I've learned along the way. And so when I look at these first 9 episodes, everything from the reality of your 20s, humble beginnings, refinement of character, relentless resilience, defying expectations, flatline failures, concealed confidence, silent surrender, and finally, niche interest. Those first 9 episodes hold such a special place in my heart. And the reason why was because, like I said, it felt like I pulled pages or thoughts straight from my journals, things that I had learned throughout the first 8 years of my 20s, things that I would have loved to known beforehand, or maybe would have loved to have, just advice I would have loved to have along the way. I thought it was really important for you to see this part of me, to know my thoughts as you heard my words, and that is why those first 9 episodes are so important. That doesn't mean the pace of the show is gonna change in any major way. We are still going to be having vulnerable topics and talking about the hard things and going after it, because the most important thing about Let's Unravel is this is a place where people can be seen, known, and heard. If there's 3 things that I've learned through this whole podcasting journey, I think I could summarize it like this. 1, it's messy. It's messy to start something new in a space you've never been before. Now, 2 would be leap into action. That's the best thing that you could possibly do. Instead of being paralyzed by perfectionism, leaping into action was the best thing I possibly could have done. Was it messy? Absolutely. But do I regret leaping into it? No, because I don't know if I would have started if I didn't take that first big leap. And 3rd, I would say becoming an unraveler. Not because the show's called Let's Unravel, but it's because there's these major themes in life where it's not until you slowly start to take apart different things, taking apart your expectations, like I did in Defying Expectations. It wasn't until I slowly started to unravel those thoughts that I started to finalize what I really thought about these topics. I think it's so easy to follow the status quo of what the world is saying, or to just go based off your friends, or honestly, any of the people that you respect. And the reason why we respect people is because they have standards. They have a lifestyle that we're trying to obtain. And so by becoming an unraveler, you're able to set those standards for yourself. And that was something that was a special part of this journey, is having to unravel things, everything from being intimidated to start, being intimidated to put out new episodes each week, being intimidated to share certain stories. There's so many things about life where you can be intimidated by, but when you leap into action, it's amazing how the things that once scared you don't necessarily scare you anymore. It actually makes me think of a funny story. Like a perfect example is I had a bunch of weddings this past summer that I had to go to, and I haven't been to a wedding in a couple years before this point. And I remember when I used to go to weddings, I used to be really nervous and anxious about dancing on the dance floor. I don't even have a good reason for it. I just would sometimes be nervous I just felt awkward. That's really what it was. And I remember this past wedding season, I'd get out on the dance floor and I would just dance. I'd have a good time. I didn't need anybody to dance with me. I had a good time. And I remember a family member saying, wow, I'm impressed. You're really dancing up a storm. And I remember just instantly saying yeah, I'm not awkward anymore. And it wasn't because I stopped being awkward. Really what it was I stopped allowing intimidation to get the best of me. And then that is something that I think plagues most people's 20s is intimidation. You see people in the life that they have and you want certain things for yourself. But if we're honest, there's these moments where we get intimidated because we think we need to have the house and the white picket fence and we think we have to have it all figured out. The most important thing that I've learned about being in your 20s is if you can let go of being intimidated, if you can step into fully being who you want to be, it brings so much peace to your life. That was something that was really special that we talked about in Flatline Failures, where we talked about not allowing people to put shame on you for your failures. You don't know until you try. And sometimes you have to try to know maybe you don't like something. That was something I was always really good at is I always wanted to try a lot of different things because I wanted to know what was out there. But when I was younger, I used to carry so much shame whenever I realized I didn't like something. And anytime I didn't like something and I wanted to move on to something else, it was easy because a lot of people would categorize it as, oh, you just quit or you don't stick with anything. It was always my mom that would come in and say, it's good to try things. How are you going to know if you don't try things? And it's funny because my dad would also say to me all the time, and usually this was more focused around food, is he would always encourage me and my brother and my sister growing up to try new foods because he would always say, you never know if this could become your new favorite. And he would always, and even as I got older and would move into different careers, move into different hobbies, and he would just say, you don't know until you try. And it was the same thing with my mom whenever it was I don't think maybe playing a sport is for me. And she goes, okay, great. Maybe sports aren't for you. Maybe there's something else out there that you enjoy. And that's okay, because you wouldn't know until you tried. That has been one of the factors in doing this whole Let's Unravel podcast. In this introduction of unraveling the 10 weeks of podcasting, I had mentioned how I started this whole journey on a tight timeline and how I had a lot of good intentions. So the reason why I had a tight timeline wasn't because I just randomly decided I was going to start a podcast. It was actually because I forced myself into this tight timeline. I knew from the moment I had left my corporate job that I had wanted to start a podcast, but I had known that I had wanted to go through a little bit of a transition period to prep for this show. It was around May that I had realized that my perfectionism was just really creeping in, and instead it wasn't helping me. It was encouraging procrastination. I had learned enough in the last 8 years that the only way I'm going to take major action is if I have a tight timeline. I work very well under pressure. Honestly, I think I thrive in it personally. And so in May, I had told myself, you have 1 month. I looked at the calendar and I picked June 26th to be my launch date. And so from that point on, maybe I had about a month and a half, give or take. And I remember from that moment on, I was like, I am launching no matter what. Even if I don't even know what I'm doing, even if I don't have it edited or anything, I was going to launch. So I'd put myself on that tight timeline. Now, where the good intentions come in is I had this great idea that the way I was going to promote the whole podcast show was I was going to launch a TikTok series, and it was going to be called The Podcast Project. And it was going to be this like documentary style TikTok series where you were going to watch me set up this whole podcast from scratch. Now, I don't know if you know how much filming and editing is required in honestly any kind of video production. I severely underestimated the whole process after filming like 4 or 5 TikTok videos and realizing I was spending so much time on these TikTok videos that I wasn't even dedicating as much time to the podcast as I liked. All of a sudden, I had started to hear that phrase like, when you chase 2 rabbits, you lose them both. And I realized I was like, okay, I think I'm going to have to let go of the TikTok series to focus on the podcast. And so that was ultimately what I ended up having to do is after I launched the podcast is I realized I can't keep up with the TikTok series and also do a podcast. I hadn't figured out the best way to manage both of those things. Do I think it's possible to run a successful TikTok account and also run a podcast? Absolutely. I just think it's one of those things I hadn't cracked the code on how to manage both of those spaces well. And so that was where my good intentions ended up starting to fall by the wayside. And I definitely had bitten off more than I could chew with that instance. But once again, it goes back to being messy. You don't know until you try. And then there's times where you have to go and clean up your mess. And that was one of those moments where it was just messy. I didn't know until I took a leap. I took a leap and then I realized, okay, I have to focus on the podcast. And once I get that under my belt really well, I can circle back to the whole TikTok series and help other people start a podcast if that's something they wanted to do. Now, I wanted to let you in on a little bit of a secret because this goes back to taking action. It goes back to being messy, but ultimately it goes back to being an unraveler. So the reason why I bring all of this up is I don't think I've mentioned this before, but there was going to be a different name for Let's Unravel. So that is the name we settled on. That's the name of the show. That's what you know and hopefully love. And the original name that I had was it was going to be called Figuring It Out. The reason why I was going to name it Figuring It Out was because I remember from the time I was 18 to about 25, anytime I would talk to an adult, and by adult, I just mean someone that was significantly older than me, and they would always say like, oh, what are you going to do? Are you going to college? Do you have a career lined up? And I was just like, I don't know. I could tell you the things I'm interested in, but truthfully, like I had no clue. And I just remember there was so many times. I mean, so many times I lost track of how many times. And it was more than on, that saying like I could count how many times on one hand. It was so much more than that. You couldn't believe it. They would always say to me, usually was something like, I'm however old. Sometimes it was like, I'm 50 years old and I'm still figuring it out. And that was the line that always stuck, was every person I talked to would always say, I'm still figuring it out. And so when I was thinking about starting this podcast, I was like, I really like the name Figuring It Out. And then I started to look into it because you have to look to see if other people have that name for a show and if there's any other successful shows with that name. And all of a sudden I started to realize, oh, that is quite a popular name. It didn't feel like it was going to work for what I wanted to do. Next thing I knew, I started to think about these moments in my life where I'd have these very vulnerable conversations with one friend in particular. We'd have these very vulnerable conversations where it's like, I'm spiraling. This is what's going on. And every time I thought about figuring it out and I thought about what I wanted to name this show, I just kept thinking about that idea of the spiraling. Like, okay, spiraling. What does that look like? What does that feel like to me? And all of a sudden, I had slowly started to get this visual in my head of unraveling. And unraveling, like I just thought of like this massive like ball of like yarn or massive ball of like cords, and they were like all intertwined. And I just kept thinking of it like Well, imagine like unraveling that. And like that's life. That is so many things that we go through. It's this constant unraveling. Another great example is I think of like a necklace. And there's been times where like I've had really nice necklaces I like, and somehow I get a knot in the chain and it's so annoying. And then the necklace doesn't hang the way that I like. And there's nothing harder than trying to take a knot out of a piece of jewelry. But then what's funny is once you get the knot out of the jewelry and then you go to put it on, all of a sudden, I never realized how I have a newfound level of appreciation for that piece of jewelry because it's laying the proper way. It's just this moment where you have appreciation for something really small and really, let's say, insignificant. But if it hadn't been knotted before, you wouldn't have had that level of appreciation. When I realized figuring it out couldn't be the name of the show, and I had decided, let's unravel. Because there's so many things in life that you need to unravel. So not only talking about topics and unraveling these ideas, but also talking about pop culture because it's one of my favorite things. If you listen to Niche Interests, we got into all of some of the weirdest things that I like. In this episode, I wanted to talk about the heart behind Let's Unravel. You know, I've talked about wanting to address hard topics, but also addressing the topics that feel more approachable at times, and then getting to weave in pop culture and your thoughts, and ultimately laying the foundation that this is a place about being seen, about being known, and about being heard. I've talked about my love of music because there's nothing better than when you find yourself speechless by a situation and you're like, how could I possibly express what I'm feeling? And then all of a sudden you stumble upon a song and it just describes and it lays out these emotions that it's like, oh, I felt every single one of those feelings, and it makes you feel seen, it makes you feel known, but then it does this special thing where it makes you feel heard because it was put out into this stratosphere. That's why I always say I feel like people resonate so much with Taylor Swift, because what she does is she lays these feelings down into a song and she makes it very tangible for you to feel, and it hits all three of the being seen, known, and heard. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this episode, or should I say an episode in a phrase, is mark the start. We've talked about the heart behind the show, and we talked about the messy beginnings. We've talked about leap into action, and then we've talked about being an unraveler. But most important, it's about marking the start. Like at the top of the episode when we talked about the win of the week, and the win of the week being that we hit the 10th episode and how I had this delightful cupcake here. But what's most important is you have to mark the starts for when you take a leap. And so I don't know if you've seen this viral video. I first saw it on TikTok, and it was of this Mormon dating show. And it was with this girl. She was 24 and her name was Riley. So basically the clip shows this girl standing up in front of a group of guys and girls. And so you have the guys on one side and you have the girls on the other side. And so Riley stands up, she introduces herself, and she goes through a list of these interests she has, many of them including traveling and so on and so forth. When she's done introducing herself, this is an opportunity where one of the guys gets to stand up and introduce themselves to her if they are interested in dating her. After she goes through her whole spiel, all of the sudden you notice none of the guys are really responding to her. So none of the guys end up getting up, and basically she has to go and sit down. And if there's one thing I've learned with editing, you can do so much in editing. And so what we don't see in that clip is there's actually a veil between Riley and the guy. The guys never even got to see her. So they never got to see her excitement talking about all of her different interests. They never even got to see her appearance. So they weren't judging her based on her appearance. But what we also missed was that she was the first person to get up and to introduce herself. This goes back to the leaping into action. She was the first person to step out, and being first, a lot of times it's messy. You also see is on the guy's side, none of the guys had first stepped out. And that is something that's so crucial for doing anything the first time, is there's no expectation of what to expect, should we say. This is one of those moments where it's easy when you have siblings to see, oh, my older brother or sister have done this, and so I have a context for what this would look like. When you're the first person to do something and you're the first person to take that leap, just like Riley, and all of a sudden nobody meets you with any, oh, hey, Riley, I am so-and-so. It feels very rejecting. It feels very embarrassing. But then what's so interesting is in that moment, she could have easily been like, this is so embarrassing. I feel so rejected, which maybe she did feel all those feelings. But then all of a sudden, now, whenever that was filmed and that video goes out, it goes viral. I'm sure that video changed her life. And now you have all these people reacting to it and they're like, oh, Briley, she was adorable. Like good for her for standing up. Like, I can't believe nobody stepped out and talked to her back. And that's one of the silver linings about stepping out. Taking those first steps, leaping into action, and being messy. When that moment, it doesn't necessarily feel like she has anything tangible to hold on to. And then you see this viral clip and it almost feels as though you have something tangible to hold on to. And another idea that I even think about this, about taking risks, about taking leaps, about things looking messy, is bringing this back to The Office, because I think in like the first or second episode, I talked about The Office. I love The Office. And my favorite episode arc within The Office is the Michael Scott Paper Company episodes. And right before and I'm sorry if you have never seen The Office and I just spoiled it for you, apologies. But my favorite is, so Michael Scott gets to this point with Dunder Mifflin, paper company he works for, that ultimately they're not treating him well and he threatens to leave, and he ends up saying to his boss, you have no idea how high I can fly. And the best part is, after he quits, the receptionist also quits and follows him to go start his own paper company. And the funniest thing is, like, this is a 3 to 4 episode arc. It's my favorite episodes in the series. And my favorite is, you see Michael Scott going through this breakdown that all of a sudden he goes, I quit my job. I left everything I knew to start this company, and like, I don't know what to do. And it was just one of those moments where he's really falling by the wayside. And so then Pam comes along and pep talks him, and it's like, okay, we'll keep going. And then at the end of the first episode of like a 4 episode arc, where all of a sudden Pam, she's the receptionist, she starts breaking down crying, and she basically starts reiterating all the things that Michael Scott had said, where it's like, I left my job. I was working with my fiance. I had security. Why did I do this? And then all of a sudden it's like, there's something in Michael Scott, because it goes back, there's like this phrase where it says, like, when one person freaks out, the other person knows that it's like, I have to be reassuring. And so Michael Scott, it's like, any insecurities he had, any fear that he had, it's like he stops, because now he's like, this is my job to make sure she feels secure in this moment. And it was a really unique exchange. And with Michael Scott Paper Company, you know, if you've seen the series, you know, he ends up selling that paper company because he ends up getting all of his old clients to follow him to his new company, which they're broke by the end. Like, by the final episode in the arc, his company can't survive. But Dunder Mifflin, his former employer, has no idea about it. And so the next thing you know, they get bought out and they get their old jobs back. It's just such a funny and wild story, but it's one of my favorites because it's life. You know, sometimes you can take a risk and sometimes it pans out, and then sometimes you take risks and you realize, oh my God, I don't like this, and you have to pivot. And I think that's something where when you look at life, there's so much joy in the journey when you can realize it's going to be messy. You got to take a leap into action and just unravel things as you go. In the process of writing this whole episode and thinking about different life lessons, something that dawned on me is I was thinking about the Marvel movies, and I just think the Marvel movies have such a great illustration of just life and some of the life lessons you learn along the way. And an example of this is I was thinking about Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and I was thinking about how he's had like a different suit, like a Spider-Man suit, in like every Marvel movie he's been in. So of course I Googled this and I found out he actually had 8 different Spider-Man suits throughout the Marvel movies that he's been in so far. That made me realize that the first Spider-Man suit that he had was the one he made himself. And then eventually he gets an upgrade from Tony Stark, and it's this like out of this world suit. But isn't that just one of those examples where it goes back to life, where when you first start, it's like, ooh, it's really rough. Just like in Humble Beginnings, when I showed you my first duct tape wallet, and it was really rough. Whenever I go to start something new, I look at that wallet and it's humbling and it's grounding because it makes me think of milestones. And just like I mentioned in this episode about having something to hold on to for your milestone, it's something that I've become incredibly passionate about, that as I've had friends and as they've accomplished accomplished different career success and hit any kind of milestone is I always encourage them, you should get something to mark that milestone. I remember when I'd first gotten my corporate job and I had made it through the first year of working there, I had gotten my first bonus and it was a really good first year. And I remember having this money and thinking, oh, you know what? I really want to buy something that would highlight this milestone in my life. And something that I love is I love watches. I had gone to this really nice watch store and I'd always wanted to buy a really nice watch, something that was like a couple $100s. After I'd gotten this bonus, I'd gone to this watch store and I actually picked out my very first watch. It's the watch I actually wear in all of my episodes. And so I'll take it off really quick. So this watch is really special to me because it was my symbol for completing my first year, getting a bonus, and it marked a lot of firsts in that particular career. I loved the idea of getting to hold on to something that it marked this achievement I had in my life. And I realized how important it had become to me. And then as I'd gotten older, I started to realize as I had friends and as I had other people in my department, and something that I would tell people all the time is I'm like, you need to take some time and, you can use a lot of money, you can use a little bit of money, but find something that can mark a milestone in your life, because every time you look at it, there will be a sense of pride. And the thing is, we hold on to our hurts and pains so close and so dearly, but we don't do the same thing for our victories. And I mean, that's something that I was never good at. It was something I've had to really practice, is holding on to the victories. And that's why I've made it such a core part of this show, is the win of the weeks. Another really unique moment is when I was working in this startup. The first product we sold at this startup, one of the guys had printed out a cover page for what the product was, and he collected all of our signatures, put it on this piece of paper that resembled the product that we had sold, and he framed it. And he actually sent a framed picture of the product with all of our signatures, and it went out to all of us that were with the organization at that point in time. And so I think there was about 10 of us at that point, all 10 of us that had been with this startup from the time it had started. We all got this picture frame, and it was just this really beautiful moment of getting to see all this hard work that you've poured into. And a lot of times it just feels like it's an endless void. Then to realize, oh yeah, I have this frame that shows this work that I've done. And what's unique about it is that there's 9 other people that have this exact same frame. And it forms this bond to you and this team that you guys had done this hard work, and it acknowledges this milestone. The reason why I wanted the episode and a phrase to be Mark the Start is because it's about marking your milestones, and it's about having something tangible. It doesn't have to be expensive. For this episode, I got a cupcake, It didn't have to be expensive. It's just a way of acknowledging that you've arrived at some type of milestone. Like I said at the top of the episode about how there's 3 major things I learned. It's messy when you start, about how you have to leap into action. It's funny because it actually makes me think about this quote, and this quote has also been referenced in The Office. And as soon as I say it, if you're a fan of The Office, you're going to know exactly what quote I'm talking about. So the quote goes, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take," by Wayne Gretzky, by Michael Scott. So if you watch The Office, you'll know that Michael Scott wrote that quote down, and it just says, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take," by Wayne Gretzky. And underneath Wayne Gretzky, he writes his name. And it just felt really fitting for this episode to include that. But once again, stepping out, it's messy, to leaping into action, you don't know until you start. And perfectionism is great to a degree because it pushes you to have this standard, but it also becomes crippling when the perfectionism leads to procrastination. And, I totally understand, and I know that from a firsthand experience. And then third, it's about becoming an unraveler. You got to unravel some of these things to figure out what your core beliefs are within all of it. So thank you for celebrating with me the 10th episode of Let's Unravel. So without any further ado, let's jump into our sticky thoughts, our thoughts that stick. Number 1, it's going to be take the leap even if it's messy. Number 2, I'm still figuring it out. And number 3, mark the start. And last but certainly not least, 4, prioritize having something to hold for your milestones. So thank you again for hanging out with me and celebrating the 10th episode of Let's Unravel. This has been such an exciting journey. And if you haven't listened to the first 9 episodes, I do encourage you to head over there. They are thoughts that really came from my diary. So I would love to connect with you all more. You can connect with us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Let's Unravel Pod. And if you enjoyed this week's episode or the podcast show in general, please leave a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Your comments and 5-star ratings go a long way. Also, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button or follow button anywhere you might listen to stay up to date on all new episodes. We release new episodes every single Thursday, and you're not going to want to miss a thing. Well, I guess it's that time of the episode to give you my thoughts on a pumpkin spice latte. I think it's worth the hype. I do, especially if you're getting one from a local coffee shop. I mean, there's a really good local coffee shop with a pumpkin spice latte here in Connecticut. It can't be beat. And I will say a pumpkin spice latte from Starbucks does feel like a rite of passage during the fall season. Anyways, that's all, and I'll see you soon. Bye.